Capcom hit gold when it came to Resident Evil, so it was a bit of a no-brainer that they would start producing different takes on the formula. Dino Crisis was exactly that, and just like the name suggests, instead of fighting your way out of a zombie-ridden city, it would instead see you taking up the fight against dinosaurs. The game drops you off on Ibis Island, a highly fortified military fortress, with the player being placed into the role of Regina, a member of an organization known as TRAT, who's sent to the island to apprehend a rogue scientist. For as insane as the premise sounds, Dino Crisis does a good job of building its story and atmosphere, which helps create one of the most terrifying games you'll find on the PlayStation. The developers clearly took special care to explore alternatives for the genre in practically every way. The visual presentation became fully 3D as opposed to the beautiful but fixed pre-rendered backgrounds found in Resident Evil, and in order to achieve the very foreign yet realistic feeling of battling with dinosaurs, the combat was slightly changed as well. The standard weapon may easily inflict severe damage on even the most vulnerable dinosaur, and you are almost always going to sustain injuries in a close battle. However, there is far more room in the game to mix up your encounter tactics. A huge emphasis on puzzles was also present in the game, from concentration and memory style tasks to having to manipulate 3D puzzle elements in a timely manner. It felt like Capcom took everything they had learned from Resident Evil and turned it all up to 11. After the outstanding Resident Evil remakes, I think it's about time that Dino Crisis finally gets the same treatment. Tobal 2 is one of those games that never made its way west, mainly due to its predecessor not making much of an impact as the developers first hoped, and it's a shame as the sequel built upon nearly every aspect the first game introduced to great effect. All the previous fighters made their way back, with some new additions being added to the roster, as well as a slew of new modes and improvements that made the fighting system even more enjoyable than it once was. The basics of Tobal didn't change, with the controls being identical and most of the characters' moves remaining the same. However, it was far more combo orientated, so every character could link moves together for some impressive combinations and juggles. On top of this, each character could now perform a projectile attack, and although it steals some of your health when it charges up, it more than makes up for it by doing an immense amount of damage when it hits. One of the first game's crowning achievements was the quest mode that saw you exploring various dungeons and encountering other fighters to defeat. This aspect of the game was improved quite a bit in the sequel, and added towns to visit where you need to eat and sleep in order to stay at peak performance. The most striking feature of the game though is no doubt the visuals, which presented clean, textured characters that moved at a blistering pace. Each move and special attack took advantage of some pretty impressive lighting effects that added a real weight to each and every move that connected. Although it was by no means the best fighting game on the system, its unique mechanics and rewarding gameplay provided a lot of innovation that helped set it apart. The series has largely been forgotten at this point, and a remake is likely something we will never see, but unfortunately it just never hit the mark with the wider gaming audience. RPGs are typically the first choice when you want to play a game with a great plot, interesting characters, and engaging dialogue. A 3D action adventure wouldn't probably be your first choice, but Soul Reaver is very well developed, and while not extremely deep, it is likely one of the more dramatic and intense stories you can jump into on the PlayStation. You are Raziel, the leader of your own powerful clan of vampires in the gothic land of Nosgoth. After being cast out of his clan and left to die, he slowly rises from the ashes and sets out on a path of revenge against his former allies. For as well as the story is presented, when it comes to gameplay, an equal amount of puzzles as well as combat also have a major stake in the game as a whole. The combat is simple, yet it never becomes stale, and when you first start out, you're only equipped with your claws. However, since you fight vampires for the vast majority of the game, you will need to find other means of defeating your enemies, such as impaling or throwing them into sunlight, water or fire, which are the main ways to vanquish them once and for all. The main gimmick of Soul Reaver, however, is the ability to shift back and forth between different realms. You do most of your fighting and all of your puzzle solving in the material realm, but shifting to the spectral realm to be able to reach new areas is a puzzle in itself at times. These two distinct styles of play serve to offer up a nice amount of variety throughout the adventure, which is only topped by the boss fights, where everything you've learned up until that point comes into focus. First of all, the bosses are your brothers, not just random enemies enemies. Therefore, the storyline actually benefits from these encounters, with each and every consecutive fight increasing the stakes as you tick them off one by one. With its tight gameplay, mesmerizing story, and incredible presentation, if it never gets a remake, it's still a worthwhile adventure to make your way through. Tenchu is hands down one of the best ninja games ever conceived. It was the first of its kind to truly implement a distinct focus on stealth and provided a well-needed break from the usual hack and slash games of its time. It saw you assuming the role of one of two different characters as they carried out the dirty work for their master and mentor, Lord Goda. The adventure was split up into a series of missions that all provided a generous amount of variety and would see you taking on different objectives other than simply killing anything that moves. From finding secret items to infiltrating villages under siege, there was plenty to do, and it was all backed up with an incredible array of weaponry to complete your tasks. You've got several combat maneuvers that are very easy to learn, as well as the use of a grappling hook that will allow you to literally go anywhere within a level. You can scurry along rooftops, grapple onto ledges, and slither along walls, all while trying not to be seen by the enemy. But when you are, the action is just as engrossing as the stealth. From basic swords to throwing knives and smoke bombs, there's a dizzying amount of options that each have a purpose within the game. And not only is the experience of playing Tenchu a memorable one, but the game's rewards for your accomplishments are substantial as well. You're ranked on your performance in each mission, and attaining the highest rank of Grandmaster, which usually involves tackling the entire mission without being seen, provides you with a new tool or item to take along for future missions. The way the game constantly deals out these new ways to interact with the enemies and environments provides a real incentive to keep playing that just never gets old. Admittedly, it's held back by its mediocre presentation, but in the end it's a game that really puts you into the mind and world of a ninja that would be perfect to see fully reimagined on modern consoles today. When it comes to RPGs, there is no shortage of quality titles on the PlayStation. With the likes of Jade Cocoon and Final Fantasy series, players were absolutely spoiled for choice when it came to choosing an adventure to jump into. One of my personal favourites that I would love to see get a remake, however, is Xenogears. It weaves by far one of the best stories you'll likely experience in an RPG, with it introducing you to Fei Feng Wong, a young martial artist who's currently living in a peaceful village. One fateful night, gigantic robots known as Gears appear throughout the town and start destroying everything in sight. The next morning, for the safety of the few surviving villagers, Fei decides to set out on his own to discover the truth about his past and the mysterious Gears that destroyed his home. This journey sees you traveling the world and meeting a lovable cast of NPCs which all bring their own distinct personalities to the table and help bring life to the events that transpire in believable ways. Of course, a game's story is only half of the equation, and without solid gameplay to support it wouldn't mean anything. You guide Fei and his party through various towns and dungeons throughout the world in a fairly linear fashion that guides you from place to place. When you encounter one of the game's many random battles, the game implements a rather unique battle system. Each character in your party has 3 different attacks assigned to one of the buttons on the controller. You must create a series of combos by combining the different attacks at your disposal, and some of these combos lead to special attacks, almost like in a fighting game that your characters can learn over time. Then there's of course the gears, which you get to utilize in battle as well, but there is an added level of strategy. Each attack you enter uses up a certain amount of fuel, and if you run out, then you're shit out of luck. So conserving and knowing when to use your gears at the right time is the key to getting the job done. Overall, Xenogears stands firmly as one of the best RPGs on the PlayStation, and is one that would benefit most from seeing an upgrade for modern systems. Nightmare Creatures centres around a plague that has struck the city of London and has transformed many of its inhabitants into grotesque monstrosities that now linger throughout the town. Taking the role of a skilled swordswoman or a temple priest, the player has to make their way through the streets and clear them of each threat, all the while tracking down the person responsible for releasing the virus in the first place. This is no easy task, as even your first encounters in the game will provide a steady challenge, as the combat system slowly reveals its intricacies abilities that is primarily made up of a series of combos for the player to memorize. The more effective ones require pressing a large number of buttons, and with the enemies taking no prisoners, you'll soon find how unforgiving the game can be. But if you stick with it and get to grips with the various options you're given, the combat soon flows incredibly well, and with just how visceral it can be at times, it easily becomes the standout aspect of the game. What makes getting through nightmare creatures a bit more manageable, the various upgrades you'll find yourself earning as you progress. There's a surprising amount of weapons, with the amount of damage doubling and even tripling with each upgrade, which in turn makes clearing a room much less of a burden. Complementing the game is the dark and dreary atmosphere that will draw you into the action and no doubt produce a few scares throughout your playtime. The lack of light will conceal monsters in corners and dark alleyways that are all keen to jump out and try to get the upper hand before you have the time to react. In recent times, this has been called the Bloodborne of the PlayStation 1, and it's easy to see why, with its grueling combat and dreadful atmosphere, so if it never gets a remake, it's still a game that's just as enjoyable today as it was all those years ago. The PlayStation revolutionized the survival horror genre by catapulting it into the mainstream with the likes of Resident Evil that made a huge impact upon their release. Naturally, this prompted other companies to chip in their 2 cents and try their hand at creating the next big thing. This is where Konami came in and unleashed Silent Hill upon the unsuspecting public, which quickly cemented itself as one of the most horrifying experiences available on the console. It saw you assuming the role of Harry Mason as he travels with his daughter to Silent Hill for a vacation, and not long before hitting the town, they encounter what appears to be a girl in the road, which results in Harry crashing. When he awakes, Cheryl, his daughter, is gone. The summer atmosphere is somehow being replaced by overcast fog and snow, and Harry is slowly exposed to the terrifying dark side of the town, a location where the surroundings have changed to bloody, rusty, and horrible counterparts, and in your search for Cheryl, you'll have to repeatedly travel through this hell, as well as deal with a wicked cult's dreadful plans. Thankfully, you've got many ways in which to fight back against the hordes of nightmares seemingly come to life, from the trusty pipe to several guns and other inventive items that all have a role to play. Of course, it's not exactly a walk in the park trying to manage every threat that comes your way, and more than not, the best course of action is to belt it the hell out of there. But sometimes you're forced to fight, mainly the bosses that make up the game, and here the various options at your disposal really come into play. Silent Hill is desperately in need of a remake, but it still offers a distinct atmosphere and incredible story that would be perfect for audiences to experience on modern consoles. Fighting games were a dime a dozen on the PlayStation, with only a few of them managing to create a lasting impact. Tekken 3 and Bloody Roar proved that the PlayStation was the place to be when it came to fighting games, but one lesser known title that deserves the remake treatment would have to be Bushido Blade. If there is one word that could sum up the game as a whole, it would have to be realism. It's a weapon-based fighting game, but there are no life bars, and each fighter is as vulnerable as they would be in real life. If you get hit in the shin, you will have to watch your character drop to one knee and slowly shuffle for the rest of the fight. If you manage to thrust your sword through your opponent, then that's that. There's no second chances, and all it takes is one well-timed hit to secure your victory. You've got 6 characters to choose from, each a little less or more stronger or faster from the last, as well as several weapons from spears to longswords and hammers that all have their own pros and cons. The fighting system is very complex, and it may seem simple at the beginning, but looks can be deceiving. Each character has 2 separate stances that allow them to perform different sets of moves. For example, one will allow you to better defend yourself when up close and personal, and the next giving you the ability to reach in from afar to deal a devastating blow. There are no special moves, just sword striking combos and deflecting away your enemy's attacks, further hammering home the sense of realism the game was going for. Like most fighting games, there's a selection of modes to get stuck into as well, from slash mode to survival and POV, that brings the action into the first-person perspective and is one of the most immersive ways of playing the game. On the whole, Bushido Blade was an outstanding attempt at bringing the tense and nail-biting experience of sword fighting to the screen, which proved that it doesn't always have to be about flashy combos and over-the-top characters to provide an unforgettable fighting game. Here's hoping we get to see it again one day. Parasite Eve was at the time a very different type of RPG to come from Square. It placed a huge emphasis on horror and introduced players to Aya, a rookie NYPD detective who's plunged into a dark and twisted plot after she is the only survivor of a disaster that saw many people bursting into flames before her very eyes. For a cinematic RPG, the story is very interesting and original and carries itself with a serious attitude, to the point of it feeling like a movie with plenty of mature themes and exciting twists that make it one of the finer aspects of the game. You'll find yourself searching the streets of the city to get to the bottom of what went down, and this is where the gameplay gets its chance in the spotlight. Exploration and puzzles are just as prominent as the enemy encounters themselves, but battles is where Parasite Eve begins to truly come into its own by offering a really unique take on the usual RPG formula many will be accustomed to. You're able to fully control Aya just like in an action RPG, with the only difference being that there is an active time bar dictating when you can take your actions. Aya has the ability to utilize something known as parasite energy, or PE for short, which gives her a whole host of abilities to tackle enemies with. Many actions in the game will cost a certain amount of PE, with your stockpile of energy slowly regenerating throughout each encounter, which adds a sort of risk versus reward aspect to each decision you make. Complementing this system is the robust and deep upgrade options you're presented that allow you to augment your weapons and abilities to devastating effect. The first game would still make for the perfect candidate when it comes to a remake, as it would allow everyone who missed it to experience the unique story and gameplay that made it so memorable in the first place. The Final Fantasy games on the PlayStation is some of the all-time greats when it comes to RPGs, and even though 7 is quite often considered the more popular choice, the 9th entry is just as deserving of getting the remake treatment. The narrative follows the adventure of Zidane and his band of like-minded thieves as they set out to kidnap a princess. Eventually, the kidnapping leads to some very devastating events, mainly in the Queen attacking the ship that you're using. Alongside that, the princess actually wanted to be kidnapped because of this very reason. She knows something is wrong with the Queen, and this sets up the group's journey that soon descends into a far grander plot involving the fate of the entire kingdom. Like many other RPGs, the gameplay is simple and sees you battling through waves of enemies, increasing your character's strengths along the way to ultimately defeat the final boss. When it comes to the battles themselves, there's a turn-based system in place where every move is beholden to something known as the ATB gauge. This means that you have to wait until the bar is full until you can carry out your attack, so planning ahead and choosing your skills wisely is the best way to get ahead in each fight. As you would expect, you've got a generous amount of abilities from basic hits to more devastating types of magic, as well as a whole range of items that can potentially give you the upper hand, that really come into play during some of the more challenging encounters you'll face later on. Jobs also manage to play a huge role in the game as well, with each of them having their own unique abilities, from stealing to wielding magic, but they can't be changed, so you'll find yourself relying on specific characters when the game calls for it. Overall, when it comes to remakes, Final Fantasy IX is one entry in the series that would wholeheartedly benefit from a modern update. The tale of Zidane and his friends is one that has stood the test of time, and in my as well as many others' eyes, it's still one of the best in the series. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos, and share the show with your friends. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skilljim, Shuden, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.